This is a story about a man who misses his train on the way to an important job interview. The missed train. Daniel woke up at 6:30 a.m. He turned off his alarm and sat up slowly. Today was important. He had a job interview in another city. He looked at the clock again. 6:30, he said quietly. I have enough time. Daniel got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. He made coffee and toasted 2 pieces of bread. While he was eating, he checked his train ticket on his phone. The train left at 7:45 a.m. The train station was 20 minutes away. I need to leave at 7:15, he thought. That will be safe. After breakfast, Daniel took a shower. Then he put on a clean blue shirt and black shoes. He looked in the mirror. You are ready, he said to himself. At 7:10, he picked up his bag and left his apartment. Outside, the morning was cool and quiet. The sky was light gray. Daniel walked quickly to the bus stop and felt calm. The bus arrived at 7:18. Daniel looked at his watch. That's okay, he said. I still have time. But after 5 minutes, the bus stopped. It did not move. The driver stood up and spoke loudly. Everyone, there is traffic ahead. There has been a small accident. We will wait. Daniel looked out the window. Cars were not moving. He checked his watch again. 7:30. He felt nervous now. If we don't move soon, I will miss the train, he thought. 10 minutes passed. The bus moved slowly, then stopped again. Daniel stood up and walked to the front of the bus. Excuse me, he said to the driver. How long will we wait? I'm not sure, the driver replied. Maybe 10 more minutes. Daniel sat down again. He took a deep breath. What should I do? He asked himself. At 7:42, the bus finally arrived at the station. Daniel ran off the bus. He did not walk. He ran. Inside the station, he looked at the big screen. Train 204 to Brighton. Departure time 7:45. Platform 6. Daniel ran to platform 6. When he arrived, the train doors were closed. He knocked lightly on the door. The train did not open. Slowly, the train began to move. Daniel stood on the platform and watched it leave. He missed it. For a moment, he said nothing. He just stood there. Then he took out his phone. He checked the next train. The next train to Brighton was at 8:30. His interview was at 9:30. It takes 1 hour to get there, he thought. If I take the 8:30 train, I will arrive at 9:30. Maybe 9:35. He opened his email and found the company's phone number. He called them. "Good morning," a woman answered. "Good morning," Daniel said politely. "My name is Daniel Carter. I have an interview at 9:30 today." "Yes, Mr. Carter," she said. "We are expecting you." "I'm very sorry," Daniel continued. "There was traffic. And I missed my train. I am on my way, but I may arrive 5 or 10 minutes late. Is that okay?" There was a short pause. "That's fine," the woman said kindly. "Thank you for calling. Please come safely." Daniel smiled. "Thank you very much," he said. He bought a coffee and sat down to wait for the next train. He felt calmer now. I cannot control everything, he thought, but I can control how I react. At 8:30, he got on the next train. This time, he arrived at 9:32. When he entered the office, he apologized again. The manager smiled and said, "No problem. These things happen." The interview went well. Daniel answered clearly. He felt confident. 1 week later, he received an email. He got the job. Sometimes, missing a train is not the end of the story. Sometimes, it is just the beginning. Today's story will take us on an unexpected journey where curiosity and courage lead to a surprising discovery. The Clockmaker's Secret. It was a quiet afternoon in the small town of Willowbrook. The streets were empty, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. Emma, a young woman with a love for old things, walked past the shops, admiring the signs that swayed softly in the wind. Her eyes caught a small, dusty shop, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. The wooden sign above the door read, "Morrison's Clocks." Emma had walked past it many times, but had never gone inside. Today, something about the shop drew her in, like a soft whisper calling her name. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the shop was dimly lit, and the walls were lined with clocks of every shape and size. Some ticked loudly, while others were completely silent. A gentle chime echoed from a grandfather clock in the corner, marking the hour. Emma felt as if she had stepped back in time. An old man appeared from behind the counter. He wore round glasses and a vest covered in tiny pockets. "Ah, a visitor," he said with a smile. "I don't often see new faces here. Welcome to my shop." Emma smiled politely. "Hello. Your clocks. They're beautiful. Do you make them yourself?" "I do," the man said. "Each one has its own story. But there is one clock here that is very special. It is not for sale. Only someone who is curious and brave may discover its secret." Emma's curiosity grew. "A secret?" she asked. The old man nodded. "Yes, follow me." He led her to the back of the shop, where a tall, intricately carved clock stood. It was unlike any other in the shop. Its hands moved backward, and strange symbols were etched into the wood. "This is the moonlight clock," he said softly. "It can show things that are hidden, but only for those who are patient and watch carefully." Emma leaned closer. She noticed that the clock's face shimmered in the dim light. Suddenly, the hands began to move faster, and the symbols glowed. A small door at the bottom of the clock creaked open, revealing a tiny key. "Take it," the old man whispered. "It will guide you." Emma picked up the key, feeling its cool metal in her hand. She didn't know what it opened, but her heart raced with excitement. She left the shop and looked around the quiet street. Nothing seemed unusual until she noticed a small alley she had never seen before. At the end of the alley was a wooden door. covered in ivy and almost hidden from view. She inserted the key into the lock. With a click, the door opened. Inside was a small room filled with clocks, all ticking in harmony. But in the center of the room stood a clock unlike any Emma had ever seen. Its glass face reflected the moonlight, even though the sun was still in the sky. The moonlight clock began to chime softly. Emma watched in awe as the hands moved, revealing a scene inside the glass. It showed the town of Willowbrook. But in the past, people walked along the streets, unaware of her presence. She saw children playing in the town square, a young couple sitting by the fountain, and a baker waving to a customer. Emma realized the clock didn't just show time. It showed stories. Stories of the town. Stories of people long gone. Stories waiting to be remembered. She understood then why the old man had called her curious and brave. She had discovered the secret of the moonlight clock. It was a keeper of memories. For hours, Emma watched the scenes unfold, each more fascinating than the last. She saw the beginnings of new friendships, the joys of simple moments, and the quiet acts of kindness that often went unnoticed. The clock reminded her that every moment, even the small ones, mattered. As the sun began to set, Emma carefully closed the door and returned the key to the old man. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will never forget what I saw." The old man nodded. The moonlight clock chooses its watchers. Remember, curiosity and patience can uncover wonders hidden in plain sight. Emma stepped back into the street. The wind carried the same gentle scent of flowers, and the town looked ordinary. But she knew its hidden stories now. As she walked home, she smiled, thinking about all the memories waiting quietly in the corner of everyday life, just like the moonlight clock had shown her. And from that day on, every time Emma passed Morrison's clocks, she felt a small spark of wonder, knowing that sometimes the most extraordinary things are hidden in the most ordinary places. Daniel is starting a new job at a marketing company, and today is his first day at the office. Daniel started his new job on Monday morning. He felt nervous, but excited. He arrived 20 minutes early because he did not want to be late. When he entered the building, he went to the front desk. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Daniel Ruiz. Today is my first day." The receptionist smiled. "Welcome, Daniel. Please sign in here." Daniel signed his name and waited. Soon, a woman walked toward him. "Hi, you must be Daniel. I'm Karen, your manager." "Nice to meet you," Daniel said. "Nice to meet you too. Let me show you around." They walked through the office. Karen showed him the kitchen, the meeting room, and the restrooms. "If you need coffee, you can use the machine in the kitchen," she said. "Thank you," Daniel replied. Then she introduced him to the team. "Everyone, this is Daniel. He's joining our marketing department." "Hi, Daniel," the team said. Daniel smiled. "Hello, nice to meet you all." He sat down at his desk. There was a computer, a notebook, and a pen. Karen said, "Your password is in this envelope. Please change it after you log in." "Okay, I will," Daniel answered. He turned on the computer and logged in. After a few minutes, he had a question. He walked to his coworker's desk. "Excuse me, could you help me for a moment?" "Of course," she said. "What do you need?" "I'm not sure how to open the shared folder." "Oh, no problem. I'll show you." "Thank you very much." "You're welcome." Later that morning, Karen called him into her office. "I'd like you to prepare a short report by Friday," she said. "Sure. When do you need it?" "Before 3 p.m., please." "No problem. I'll finish it before then." At lunchtime, Daniel sat with two coworkers. "Do you usually eat here?" he asked. "Sometimes," one of them said. "There's also a good cafe across the street." "That sounds nice," Daniel replied. In the afternoon, Daniel made a small mistake in an email. He forgot to attach a file. His coworker told him the client didn't receive the document. "Oh, I'm sorry," Daniel said. "I'll send it right away." He quickly wrote another email. "Dear Miss Lee, I apologize for the mistake. Please find the attached document below. He checked carefully before sending it. At 5 p.m., Karen stopped by his desk. "How was your first day?" she asked. "It was good," Daniel said. "I learned a lot." "That's great. You did well today." "Thank you. I'm looking forward to tomorrow." When Daniel left the office, he felt tired but proud. The first day was not easy, but he did his best. And he knew that tomorrow would be a little easier. On a quiet morning, the sea stretched endlessly, reflecting soft shades of blue and silver. A small boat drifted gently toward Coral Island, a place rarely visited and whispered about in old sailor tales. Leo, Mia, and Sam had prepared for weeks. Their goal, a hidden cove said to shelter a pirate treasure lost centuries ago. The island appeared slowly over the horizon. Jagged cliffs rising sharply from the water. Seagulls circled above, their cries blending with the gentle lapping of waves against the boat. As they approached the shore, Leo noticed unusual markings carved into the rocks. They were old and worn, almost erased by wind and rain. Yet they seemed to form a map. Stepping onto the sand, the trio followed the trail carefully. The jungle ahead was dense, sunlight barely touching the ground. They walked slowly, avoiding roots and tangled vines, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. Small streams crossed their path, the water clear and cool as it trickled over smooth stones. Hours passed as they navigated through the undergrowth. They climbed gentle slopes, stepped over fallen branches, and circled around rocky outcrops. Occasionally, the path narrowed, and they had to squeeze between large boulders, each step careful and deliberate. In the distance, they could hear the faint roar of a waterfall. When they finally reached the waterfall, they discovered a narrow opening behind the cascading water. It led to a hidden cave, its entrance partially concealed by moss and vines. Inside, the air was cool and damp. They moved slowly, their footsteps echoing softly, until a wooden chest came into view, partially buried under stones. Pushing the debris aside, they opened the chest. Coins and jewels glimmered in the muted light. Alongside them lay a compass, its needle still steady despite the years. They carefully selected a few coins, leaving most behind, and marked the spot on a map to preserve the discovery for future travelers. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in gentle shades of orange and pink, the friends sailed away from the island. The water reflected the colors of the sky, calm and soothing. Coral Island faded behind them, quiet and mysterious, holding its secrets safely for another day. The watchtower stood on a narrow stretch of stone, where the land ended and the sea began. Built generations earlier, it had once guided ships through fog and storm. Its fire visible from far beyond the horizon. Now the tower remained unlit, its purpose nearly forgotten, yet still facing the water as it always had. Each evening, waves reached the rocks below with slow, steady rhythm. The tide rose and fell without urgency, reshaping the shoreline grain by grain. Gulls circled above the tower, resting briefly on the railing before drifting back toward the open water. The path leading to the watchtower was narrow and uneven. It passed through tall grass and wind-shaped shrubs, ending at a wooden door reinforced with iron bands. The hinges creaked when opened, a sound carried easily by the sea air. Inside, the tower was simple. A spiral staircase wound upward along the stone wall. Small windows allowed thin lines of light to enter, marking the passage of time as the sun moved across the sky. Dust rested undisturbed on the steps, except where the stone had been worn smooth by years of use. At the top of the tower, the lantern room remained intact. Thick glass panes surrounded the circular space, some slightly clouded by salt. The iron frame still held the mechanism that once supported the fire. Though unused, it showed careful craftsmanship. Each piece fitted precisely into place. From this height, the coastline stretched in both directions. To the north, cliffs dropped sharply into dark water. To the south, the land sloped gently into beaches where waves arrived in quiet repetition. Far offshore, ships appeared as small shapes, moving slowly across the horizon. As night approached, the sky shifted through muted colors. Gray softened into deep blue, and stars began to appear one by one. The sea reflected faint light, its surface never completely still. The watchtower remained silent as darkness settled. No flame was lit. Yet the structure continued its vigil, facing the open water as it had for centuries. Wind passed through the open windows, and the steady sound of waves carried on through the night, unchanged. On the far edge of the northern coast, where the land ended in dark stone and the sea stretched without limit, there stood a lighthouse. It was old, taller than most buildings in nearby towns, and built from thick gray blocks that had survived many storms. The lighthouse stood alone on a narrow cliff, separated from the nearest village by several miles of rough coastal road. Few people visited it anymore. Ships passed farther out at sea, guided by modern navigation systems, but the lighthouse remained active. Every night, as it had for over 100 years, its light turned slowly across the water. The keeper of the lighthouse was a man named Elias Crow. Elias lived in the small stone house connected to the tower. His days followed a steady routine. He woke early, often before sunrise, and walked the grounds around the lighthouse, checking for damage from wind or salt spray. He cleaned the lenses, inspected the gears, and recorded weather conditions in a large leather-bound logbook. The lighthouse had never been automated. Local authorities decided long ago that it was safer with a keeper present, especially during heavy storms, when equipment could fail. Elias did not mind the isolation. The sea provided constant movement and sound. Waves struck the rocks below, seabirds circled overhead, and foghorns from distant ships called through the mist. One morning, while inspecting the base of the tower, Elias noticed something unusual. Near the edge of the cliff, partially hidden by tall grass, there was a wooden crate. It was darkened by water and marked with faded letters that were difficult to read. Elias approached carefully. The crate was sealed, but damaged, as if it had been carried by the sea and thrown onto the rocks below before somehow reaching the top of the cliff. He examined it closely. There were no warning labels, no signs of danger. Only a simple symbol carved into the wood. A circle with a single line through its center. Using a small pry bar from his tool shed, Elias opened the crate. Inside, wrapped in thick cloth, was a brass instrument. It was shaped like a lantern, but heavier, with glass panels that were slightly tinted blue. Along its base were small markings, etched carefully into the metal. Elias had never seen anything like it. He carried the object inside the lighthouse and placed it on the work table beneath the main lens. For several hours, he examined it from every angle, trying to understand its purpose. There were no switches, no obvious power source. But when Elias adjusted one of the small dials near the base, the glass began to glow faintly. The light was soft and steady, unlike the bright white beam of the lighthouse. It did not flicker or fade. That night, Elias decided to test the strange lantern. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, he lit the lighthouse as usual. The massive lens rotated smoothly, sending its beams across the darkening sea. Then, carefully, Elias placed the brass lantern near one of the tower's narrow windows. At first, nothing seemed to happen. But as the lighthouse beam passed over the water, the blue glow from the lantern began to stretch outward, forming a thin line across the surface of the sea. Elias watched closely. The line of light did not replace the lighthouse beam. Instead, it followed it, slightly below, tracing the waves with surprising precision. Moments later, a distant ship altered its course. Elias recognized the vessel. It was a cargo ship that often passed too close to the rocky shoreline. It turned earlier than usual, moving safely toward deeper water. Elias noticed the change in his logbook. Over the next several nights, Elias repeated the experiment. Each time the lantern was placed near the window, its soft blue light extended across the sea. And each time, ships adjusted their paths more smoothly, avoiding dangerous shallows without sudden turns or warning signals. Word began to spread among sailors. Some claimed the light felt clearer than normal navigation signals. Others said it appeared during fog, when other lights seemed dull or distorted. One evening, a small fishing boat approached the lighthouse dock, something that rarely happened. A fisherman climbed the stone steps and knocked on Elias's door. "We've noticed something," the man said. "Your light seems different lately. It's easier to follow." Elias nodded, but said little. He continued his routine, maintaining the lighthouse while quietly using the lantern each night. He never moved it outside the tower. It remained a silent companion, glowing patiently beside the great rotating lens. Weeks passed, and storms arrived. Heavy winds battered the coast, and rain lashed against the stone walls, Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The lighthouse beam struggled against the thick fog. On the worst night of the storm, Elias climbed the tower with the lantern in his arms. The wind howled through cracks in the stone. The windows rattled violently. Elias placed the lantern at the highest window and adjusted its dial fully. The blue light brightened. Outside, the fog seemed to thin along the lantern's path. Not completely, but enough to form a narrow corridor of visibility over the water. Later reports confirmed that 3 ships passed safely through the storm that night, guided by the lighthouse when other signals failed. After the storm, officials visited the lighthouse. They inspected the structure, reviewed Elias's logs, and noted the unusually low number of maritime incidents in the area. They asked if anything had changed. Elias simply said, "The lights being well maintained." The officials accepted the answer. Years passed. Elias continued his work, and the lighthouse continued to turn its beam across the sea each night. The brass lantern remained beside it, unchanged and steady. When Elias eventually retired, a new keeper took his place. The lantern was never mentioned in official records, never removed, never studied. It stayed where it was. And to this day, sailors say that along that stretch of coast, the light is different. Clearer, steadier, as if something within the lighthouse never sleeps. In a small village surrounded by hills and meadows, there was a hidden garden known only to a few. People said the plants in the garden whispered if you listened carefully. It was a quiet place, overgrown with moss-covered stones, flowering vines, and a small bubbling brook that wound its way through the center. A young woman named Mary discovered the garden one sunny afternoon. She had wandered farther than usual while exploring the countryside, chasing the soft hum of bees and the sweet scent of blooming flowers. When she found the garden, she stopped at the entrance and hesitated. It felt as though the air itself was welcoming her in. Mary wandered slowly along the winding paths. She noticed how the leaves seemed to shimmer when sunlight passed through them, and how the flowers bent slightly, almost as if nodding in greeting. She knelt beside the brook and listened. If she closed her eyes, she could hear faint whispers, the rustling of petals, the gentle chatter of water, the sigh of the wind through tall grass. Every day after that, Mary returned to the garden. She carried a small notebook and wrote down the shapes of the flowers, the patterns of the stones, and the songs of the birds. Sometimes she brought seeds to plant, careful not to disturb the natural calm of the garden. Slowly, she realized that the garden was teaching her patience. It asked her to slow down, to notice small details, and to simply be present. One afternoon, as a gentle rain fell, Mary saw a tiny bud she hadn't noticed before. It was pale and delicate, trembling under the raindrops. She whispered to it softly, and for a moment it seemed to glow. Mary felt a quiet warmth in her chest, as though the garden had heard her and replied in its own subtle way. Years passed, and Mary grew older. But she continued to visit the garden. The villagers sometimes asked why she spent so much time there, and she would only smile. The garden was more than a place. It was a companion, a teacher, and a reminder that beauty could be found in quiet moments, if only one paused long enough to notice. And so the garden remained, tucked away at the edge of the village, whispering softly to anyone who cared to listen. Evan found the letter while cleaning out a drawer he hadn't opened in years. It was folded neatly, once, then again. The edges softened by time. His own handwriting stared back at him. Careful, deliberate, the kind he used when he didn't want to make a mistake. He didn't remember writing it, but as he held it, he remembered the feeling. The letter had been written on a quiet afternoon long ago, when the world felt paused. Evan had been younger then, full of thoughts he didn't yet know how to carry. Writing had seemed easier than speaking. Paper didn't interrupt. Paper didn't misunderstand. He unfolded the page. The first line was simple. I don't know if I'll ever give this to you. Evan smiled faintly. That sounded like him. The letter went on, not with grand confessions or dramatic promises, but with observations. Small things. How silence felt heavier some days than others. how he had learned to enjoy mornings more than nights. How there were moments he wished he could rewind. Not to change anything, but to sit in them a little longer. There was no name written anywhere on the page. That had been intentional. At the time, Evan hadn't known who the letter was for. He only knew it was meant for someone important. Someone who might one day exist, or someone who already did but didn't yet feel reachable. He read slowly, letting each sentence settle. I think people carry more than they show, the letter said. And sometimes they get tired of holding it alone. Evan exhaled quietly. He remembered that thought. It had come to him while watching strangers pass by, each absorbed in their own lives. He had wondered how many stories crossed paths without ever colliding. The letter didn't ask for anything. It didn't demand understanding. It simply explained. As he reached the end, the final lines stood out the most. If this letter stays here forever, that's okay. Writing it was enough. Evan folded the page again and sat back. He thought about all the moments since then. The conversations he never had. The ones he did. The choices that quietly shaped his days. He thought about how much of life happened internally. Unseen. Unshared. The letter had never been sent, but it hadn't been wasted. It had captured a version of him that no longer existed, preserved in ink. A reminder that even unanswered thoughts had value. That expressing something, even privately, could lighten the weight of it. Evan placed the letter back into the drawer. Not because he wanted to forget it, but because he knew where it was now. Some things didn't need an audience. They just needed a place to rest. He closed the drawer gently and continued cleaning, feeling oddly lighter, as if the letter had done its job, even after all these years. Every night, at exactly 9 o'clock, a small light turned on in the window of the house at the end of Cedar Street. No one remembered when it first started. Some people said it had always been there. Others said it appeared one winter and never went away. But everyone noticed it, because the house itself was old, quiet, and usually dark. The light was warm and yellow. It did not flicker. It did not change. It simply stayed on, night after night. Emma noticed it during her evening walks home from work. Cedar Street was a shortcut she had taken for years. But lately, she found herself slowing down when she reached the end of the road. The light felt comforting somehow, like a promise that something steady still existed in the world. Emma lived alone in a small apartment nearby. Her days were busy, but predictable. Work, errands, dinner, sleep. Nothing was wrong, exactly. But nothing felt especially right either. Life felt like it was moving forward without asking her opinion. One evening, as she passed the house, she noticed something new. The front door was open. She stopped walking. The house looked the same as always. Tall, narrow, with peeling paint and overgrown plants. But the open door felt strange. The light in the window was still on, glowing softly. Emma hesitated. She told herself it was none of her business. Old houses had drafts. Doors opened. Things happened. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was waiting. She took a step closer. "Hello?" she called. Her voice quieter than she expected. No answer. Emma stood there for a long moment, listening. The street was empty. No cars, no voices, only the distant sound of wind moving through the trees. Finally, she stepped inside. The air smelled like dust and old paper. The entryway was narrow but clean. There were no broken floorboards, no signs of damage. It felt cared for. The light she had seen from outside came from a small lamp on a wooden table in the next room. Emma followed it. The room was simple. A chair, a table, shelves filled with notebooks. Hundreds of them. Each one carefully labeled with dates. Emma ran her fingers along the spines. The earliest date was decades old. "What is this place?" she whispered. "You could call it a record." The voice came from behind her. Emma turned quickly, her heart racing. An older man stood near the doorway. He had kind eyes and silver hair, and he smiled as if she were expected. "I'm sorry," Emma said quickly. "I didn't mean to. Your door was open." "I know," the man said gently. "It was meant to be." Emma frowned. "Meant to be?" He nodded. "You've been noticing the light for a while now." She felt a small chill. "Yes. That's usually how it starts." He gestured toward the chair. "Please, sit." Emma didn't know why she listened, but she did. The chair was solid and comfortable. The man picked up one of the notebooks. "These are moments," he said. "Small ones. Ordinary ones. The kind people forget." Emma looked at him. "Why keep them?" "Because they matter," he replied. "Even when no one else thinks they do." He opened a notebook and read aloud. March 12th. A woman laughed unexpectedly while waiting for her coffee. She surprised herself. Emma's breath caught. That had been her, years ago. She stared at him. "How do you know that?" The man smiled softly. "This house watches. Not in a way that judges, only in a way that remembers." Emma felt her chest tighten. Why? "Because people forget themselves," he said. "They forget who they were and who they still are." He closed the notebook. "The light," Emma said slowly. "What is it?" "It's a signal," he replied, "for those who feel a little lost. It says something is still here." Emma swallowed. "Why me?" The man considered her for a moment. "Because you've been walking past your own life instead of stepping into it." The words landed gently but firmly. Emma looked down at her hands. "I don't know how to change that." "You don't have to change everything," he said. "Only notice." He handed her a notebook, a blank one. "This one is yours," he said. Emma took it. The cover was plain. "What do I do with it?" "Write what matters," he said, "even if it feels small." She nodded slowly. When Emma looked up again, the man was gone. The room was quiet. She stood, notebook in hand, and walked back toward the door. Before leaving, she turned off the lamp. The house went dark. The next night, Emma turned on the light in her own window. The notebook had been sitting on the desk for months. Marcus had bought it on impulse. The cover was plain. The pages thick and unmarked. At the time, he had imagined filling it with ideas, plans, or something important. Instead, it stayed close. This morning, he noticed it again. The room was quiet, except for the sound of distant traffic. Marcus sat down and placed the notebook in front of him. He opened it carefully, as if the pages might already contain something fragile. They were empty. He stared at the first page longer than necessary. The blank space felt larger than it should have been. It made him aware of how often he waited. Waited to feel ready. Waited to know what to write. Waited for the right moment. Marcus picked up a pen. He didn't try to create anything meaningful. He wrote the date. Then he wrote a single sentence about the way the morning felt. Nothing more. The pen moved slowly, but it moved. After that, he closed the notebook and stood up. The action felt small, but it changed the tone of the room. The desk no longer felt like a place of delay. Marcus stepped outside. The air was cooler than he expected. A few clouds moved lazily across the sky. People passed without noticing him, each carrying their own thoughts, their own unseen lists of concerns. He walked without purpose, letting his thoughts stay unfinished. At a corner he rarely took, Marcus stopped. The street ahead was unfamiliar, yet calm. He turned onto it without thinking. The walk didn't lead to anything special. There was no discovery waiting at the end. But when Marcus eventually returned home, he felt different. Not inspired. Not motivated. Just slightly more present. Back at the desk, Marcus opened the notebook again. He added one more sentence. Then he closed it. That was enough for today. The notebook remained mostly empty, but it was no longer untouched. At the edge of a small town, where the houses slowly gave way to open fields, there lived a bird named Ellen. She was not a large bird, and she was not colorful in any way that made people stop and point. Her feathers were soft shades of brown and gray, the colors of earth and clouds before rain. Because of this, Ellen was often overlooked. But Ellen noticed everything. Each morning, she woke before the sun. She felt the cool air resting gently on her feathers and listened to the quiet sounds of the world preparing itself for the day. Far away, a dog might bark once. Somewhere close, leaves whispered as they moved in the breeze. Ellen liked this time best, when the world felt honest and unhurried. Ellen lived in a tall tree that had watched many seasons pass. Its branches were strong but kind, bending just enough to protect her from harsh winds. From her place near the top, Ellen could see far across the fields. She saw people walking, cars passing, and other birds flying with confidence and speed. Ellen could fly, of course. She had learned like all birds do. But she flew carefully, never too high and never too far. The open sky made her uneasy. It felt too wide, too full of unknown paths. So she stayed close to familiar places, returning again and again to the same branches, the same views, the same gentle routines. One morning, as the sun began to paint the sky with pale gold, Ellen noticed a bird she had never seen before. This bird flew higher than any Ellen had watched. Its wings moved with ease, and it seemed to trust the air completely. It circled once, twice, and then rested briefly on a nearby wire. Ellen studied the bird in silence. "You fly very high," Ellen finally said. The bird turned its head and looked at her. "I do," it repeated calmly. "Isn't it frightening?" Ellen asked. "Being so far from the ground?" The bird made a soft sound that might have been a laugh. "At first, yes, but the sky becomes familiar if you spend enough time with it." With that, the bird lifted off again, and disappeared into the brightening morning. Ellen could not stop thinking about those words. The sky becomes familiar. The day passed as usual. Ellen flew short distances, found food, rested, and watched the world move below her. But something inside her felt different, like a small door had opened and refused to close. That evening, as the light faded and the air cooled, Ellen stood on her branch and looked upward. The sky was no longer bright and endless. It was deep and calm, filled with slow-moving clouds and the first quiet stars. She spread her wings, then folded them again. "Not today," she whispered to herself. Days passed. The strange bird did not return. But its words stayed with Ellen. She began to fly a little higher each day. Not much, just enough to feel the air change. Just enough to notice how the world below became smaller and quieter. She learned new things as she did this. She learned that the wind had different voices depending on how high you listened. She learned that fear did not disappear all at once, but thinned slowly like mist in the morning light. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered quickly. The wind grew sharp, and rain began to fall without warning. Ellen flew toward her tree, but a strong gust pushed her off course. For the first time, she was forced higher than she had ever planned to go. Her heart raced. The ground seemed far away, and the rain blurred everything she knew. But then, something unexpected happened. Up there, above the rushing wind near the ground, the air was steadier. The rain softened. Ellen realized that by flying higher, she had found calm instead of chaos. She adjusted her wings and let the air carry her. When the storm passed, Ellen found herself gliding smoothly. Her fear replaced by a quiet focus. She felt present in a way she had never felt before. The sky was no longer an empty space. It was a place with layers, moods, and kindness she had never discovered from below. When she returned to her tree, everything looked the same. But she was not. From that day on, Ellen flew higher. Not always, and not without care, but with trust. She explored the sky the way she once studied the fields. She learned when to rise and when to return. She learned that courage did not mean leaving everything behind, but allowing yourself to grow beyond what once felt safe. Sometimes, as she rested in the early morning light, Ellen thought she saw a familiar bird flying far above. And though they never spoke again, she felt grateful. Because the sky, once so distant and frightening, had become a place she understood. And Ellen, the small, quiet bird, had learned that even the widest spaces can feel like home when you give yourself time to know them. Welcome. These are long, calm English stories designed for relaxed listening and natural language immersion. You can listen actively or simply let the stories play in the background. The Road Between Quiet Towns. The road did not have a name anymore. On older maps, it appeared as a thin gray line running east to west, connecting places that most people had stopped visiting. Newer maps did not show it at all. It was still there, though unmarked, cracked in places, narrowed by grass and time. The traveler stepped onto the road just after sunrise. He carried little: a worn bag, a bottle of water, a folded map printed many years ago. He was not in a hurry. The road was long, and the towns along it did not expect visitors. He had chosen this road because it was quiet. Cars did not pass here. There were no signs pointing toward attractions or landmarks. The only sounds were wind moving through tall grass and the slow rhythm of his own steps. The first town appeared before noon. It sat low in the land, built around a narrow square with a dry fountain at its center. The buildings were intact, but closed. Windows dark, doors locked, paint faded. A single shop remained open. Its sign simply read, "Supplies." Inside, the shelves were neat but sparse. A woman stood behind the counter, reading a paperback book. She looked up when the traveler entered. "You don't see many people on the road," she said. "No," he replied. "I like it that way." She nodded, as if that explained everything. He bought bread, dried fruit, and another bottle of water. They spoke briefly about the weather and the condition of the road ahead. Nothing personal, nothing unnecessary. When he stepped back outside, the square was empty again. He did not stay. By afternoon, the road rose slightly, giving a view of open fields and distant tree lines. Old fences leaned at uneven angles. Their wire rusted, but unbroken. Occasionally, a path branched off toward a farmhouse or a cluster of buildings, but the traveler stayed on the main road. This was how the road worked. It offered choices, but it did not insist. Near evening, he reached the second town. This one still had people. Children played near a shallow stream. A dog slept in the shade beside a grocery store. Someone had placed chairs outside a cafe, though no one was sitting in them. The traveler stopped for a meal. The cafe served soup and bread. The owner did not ask where he was going. People here seemed used to travelers who did not explain themselves. He spent the night at a small guest house. The room was clean. The window faced the road. In the morning, he left without waking anyone. As days passed, the towns grew farther apart. Some were little more than clusters of houses. Others were larger, with schools that no longer held classes and post offices that opened only twice a week. In each place, the traveler observed without interrupting. He noticed patterns. In some towns, people gathered near the road, as if waiting for something to arrive. In others, buildings turned inward, doors facing away from the road entirely. Once, he met another traveler. They passed each other without stopping. They exchanged a brief nod. That was enough. One evening, the road narrowed and entered a wooden stretch. Trees closed in on both sides, their branches forming a close canopy. The light changed, becoming softer, filtered. The traveler slowed his pace. Here, the road felt older. Stone markers appeared along the edges, worn smooth, their inscriptions unreadable. He wondered who had placed them here, and for what purpose. He camped beside the road that night, listening to insects and distant wind. Sleep came easily. In the morning, he found something unexpected. A sign. It was small, mounted on a wooden post. The letters were faded, but still visible. Next town, 12 miles. He had not seen a sign like that since the beginning of the road. The distance did not concern him. The fact that someone had bothered to place the sign did. The next town was different. It was arranged carefully, its streets straight, its buildings evenly spaced. Everything appeared maintained, but quiet. Too quiet. Curtains were drawn. Doors were closed. At the center stood a clock tower. The clock face showed the correct time. The traveler walked the perimeter first. He saw no people. Only when he reached the square did someone speak. "You can stay," a voice said. An older man stood near the tower, hands clasped behind his back. "We don't get many visitors," the man continued, "but we keep rooms ready." The traveler accepted the offer. Over dinner, the man explained that the town had once been a stop for traders. When the main highway moved south, the traffic disappeared. Most people left. Those who stayed, the man said, decided to keep things as they were. The traveler stayed 2 nights. On the second morning, he noticed that the clock tower no longer worked. No one mentioned it. When he left, the road widened again, as if relieved. Weeks passed. The traveler crossed rivers by old bridges, passed through towns that existed only as names on his map, and others that did not appear on the map at all. He learned the sound of his own footsteps. He learned when to stop, when to continue, and when to sit quietly and observe. Eventually, the land began to change. Hills gave way to flatter ground. The air grew warmer. The road smoothed, its surface less broken. One evening, he reached the final town marked on his map. It was larger than the others. Lights were on in many windows. People moved through the streets with purpose. At the edge of town, the road ended. Not abruptly. It simply blended into a wider street, marked with signs pointing in many directions. The traveler stood there for a long moment. Then he folded his map. He stayed in that town for several days. He spoke more than he had in weeks. He listened even more. When he finally left, he did not return to the road, but the road remained. Quiet, unmarked, waiting. And somewhere between the towns, the silence continued its slow, patient work. Welcome. This is a long, calm English story designed for relaxed listening and natural language immersion. You can listen actively or simply let the story play in the background. The last work shift. The ferry crossed the water slowly, as it always had. It did not need to hurry. The schedule had not changed in years, and neither had the number of passengers. On most crossings, there were fewer than 10 people aboard. Jonah stood near the railing, watching the shoreline pull away. The town behind him was small, practical, and quiet. It existed because the ferry did. When the ferry stopped running, the town would likely disappear. Jonah had worked on the ferry for almost 20 years. This was his final shift. He had not told many people. There was no announcement, no farewell gathering. He preferred it that way. The ferry was not a place for speeches. It was a place for routine. The engine hummed beneath the deck. The water moved in steady patterns, broken only by the wake behind the boat. Jonah checked his watch. Everything was on time. A woman sat near the windows with a bag of groceries at her feet. 2 men stood near the center, speaking quietly about equipment deliveries. A young passenger leaned against the wall, headphones on, eyes closed. Regulars. Jonah knew most of them by sight, even if he did not know their names. The ferry docked smoothly on the far side. The ramp lowered with a familiar metallic sound. Passengers disembarked without hurry. Jonah stayed on board as the crew prepared for the return crossing. This route was simple. Back and forth all day. No variation, no surprises. That was why Jonah had taken the job in the first place. On the second crossing, fog rolled in from the east. It was not heavy, but it softened the edges of everything. The shoreline became less distinct. The water blended into the sky. Jonah adjusted procedures automatically. He had done this hundreds of times. The ferry continued without issue. At the midpoint of the crossing, Jonah noticed a figure standing alone near the front of the deck. That was unusual. Passengers usually stayed near the center, especially in fog. Jonah approached calmly. "Everything all right?" he asked. The man nodded. "Just watching. There's not much to see today." The man smiled slightly. "That's what I like about it." Jonah nodded and returned to his station. When they docked, the man was gone. The rest of the day continued in its familiar pattern. Crossing, dock, crossing again. At midday, Jonah ate lunch in the small break room. The table bore marks from years of use. Someone had taped an old calendar to the wall and never replaced it. In the afternoon, the weather cleared. On the second-to-last crossing, the ferry carried only 3 passengers. Jonah stood at the rail again, watching sunlight reflect off the water. He thought about the first day he had worked here. He had been younger, uncertain. The job had seemed temporary. It rarely was. The final crossing approached. The ferry left the dock with the same quiet movement as always. No one announced that it was Jonah's last shift. No one needed to. Halfway across, the same man from earlier appeared again at the front of the deck. This time, Jonah joined him. "You ride this ferry often?" Jonah asked. "Not usually," the man replied. "Just today." Jonah waited. "I wanted to be somewhere that still moves at a reasonable pace," the man continued. "Places like this are harder to find." Jonah looked out at the water. "Yes," he said, "they are." The ferry reached the far dock. The ramp lowered. Passengers left. The man paused near Jonah before stepping off. "Thank you," he said. Jonah nodded. The ferry sat empty for a moment before the crew secured it for the night. Jonah gathered his things slowly. When he stepped off the ferry, he did not look back. The water remained calm. The route remained the same. Tomorrow, someone else would stand at the railing, and the ferry would continue to cross the water just as it always had. Welcome. This is a calm English listening story for relaxed and practical language practice. The story uses clear, everyday English and natural pacing. The morning delivery route. The delivery truck left the warehouse at 6:30 in the morning. The sky was light, but the sun had not fully risen. Streets were quiet, and most shops were still closed. Maya checked the list on her tablet before starting the engine. 8 deliveries. 3 neighborhoods. 1 small problem already. The third address on the list was incomplete. Maya sighed quietly and drove toward the first stop. The first delivery was easy. A small package for a cafe near the train station. The owner was waiting outside. "Good morning," he said. Good morning, Maya replied, handing him the box. She asked him to sign and wished him a good day. The second delivery was in an apartment building. Maya parked the truck, carried the package inside, and used the elevator. On the fourth floor, she knocked on the door. No answer. She waited 1 minute and knocked again. Still nothing. Maya checked the instructions. Leave at door if no answer. She placed the package carefully, took a photo, and returned to the truck. The third delivery was the difficult one. The address only showed a street name, not a building number. Maya drove slowly and looked for signs. She stopped near a small grocery store and went inside. "Excuse me," she said. "Do you know where this address might be?" The cashier looked at the screen. "That street is long," he said. "What is the name on the package?" Maya showed him. "Oh," he said. "That business moved last year. It's 2 streets over now." He gave her the new address. "Thank you," Maya said. She updated the tablet and continued. The next deliveries went smoothly. A bookstore, a flower shop, and an old office building. At each stop, Maya followed the same steps. Park, check the address, carry the package, confirm the delivery. At 10:30, traffic increased. Cars filled the streets, and parking became harder to find. At one address, Maya had to park far away and walk 2 blocks with a heavy box. She adjusted her grip and moved carefully. A man opened the door. "That's for us," he said. "Yes," Maya replied. "Please sign here." By noon, only 1 delivery remained. It was a house at the edge of the city. Maya followed a narrow road and checked the map twice to be sure. She arrived at the correct place and rang the bell. A woman opened the door. "Delivery," Maya said. The woman smiled. "Right on time." Maya handed over the package, completed the final step on her tablet, and returned to the truck. She checked the list again. All deliveries complete. Maya drove back toward the warehouse. The morning work was finished. Tomorrow, there would be another list, another route, and more deliveries to make. Maya drove back toward the warehouse at a steady speed. Traffic was heavier now, and she stayed in the right lane. At one intersection, the light turned yellow. She slowed down and stopped. When the light changed, she continued. As she approached the warehouse, her tablet made a short sound. New message. Maya parked the truck and checked the screen. One delivery had been marked as delayed. The customer had a question about the time of arrival. Maya opened the message and typed a short reply. Delivery completed at 11:55. Package left with recipient. She sent the message and closed the app. Inside the warehouse, another driver was unloading boxes. Maya greeted him and returned the truck keys to the desk. Busy morning? He asked. Yes, Maya said. But everything is finished. She checked the fuel level and wrote a short note about the route. Then she cleaned the inside of the truck and placed the tablet on the charger. Before leaving, she looked at the board on the wall. Tomorrow's routes were already posted. Maya found her name and read the list. A different area. New addresses. She put on her jacket and stepped outside. The day was warmer now. The city was fully awake. Maya walked toward the bus stop, thinking about the next morning's route and the packages she would deliver. Tomorrow, she would start again.